Okay, so we're moving right along. We're into Chapter 5 of our U.S. government. And in this chapter, we're going to cover the executive branch in more detail, the duties of the president, and the people who advise the president. So have a pen and paper ready to take notes and also answer some questions. So we mentioned earlier, I think it was Chapter 4, that the leader of the executive branch is the president. And again, execute is in the word executive, so it's a very action-oriented branch. They carry out the laws that Congress passes. And so in Article 2 of the Constitution, if you recall, the articles also mention the breakdown of the branches, and Article 2 describes the executive branch, and in Section 1 it states, "The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States." So basically, the President is in charge of the executive branch, but also oversees all the branches, but more specifically oversees the executive branch. So the President of the United States is the leader of the executive branch, and he makes sure that, or he or she, we haven't had a she yet, make sure all of the groups within the executive branch are carrying out their duties. So there's assistants that work with the President to help carry out the laws. The Vice President is the President's main assistant, and also if the President were to die or resign, the Vice President would take over as President. And the President has a staff of advisors that help the President gather information, answer emails and actual mail, snail mail, and plan schedules so the President can track where he or she needs to be in different conferences that he or she needs to attend. So there's the staff of advisors played a key role in keeping the President organized and knowing where to go and what to do next. So how is the organization of the executive branch laid out? Well, the President oversees all of the agencies and departments within the executive branch. And what these agencies and departments are is it's a group of men and women in each agency that carries out the daily functions of the executive branch. An agency, if we look at the Latin root, it actually means to do, to act. So agency means to have the ability to act. So it's a division within the executive branch that serves a special purpose. So we're going to go more into that so you really can imagine what that looks like. So an agency has a specific purpose in mind, and there are many agencies under the executive branch. And also for an organization, it's a group that carries out certain activities. So if you're noticing, a lot under the executive branch has to do with to do, to act, to manage, to get things done. Even the word executive means to execute. If you look at the word, you can see within it execute. So when we're talking about the executive branch, the President really has the responsibility to oversee a lot of this activity that is motivated by what the legislative branch, the lawmakers, have established. So the legislative branch sets laws, and then to get them in motion and to do, to act, to execute, that's under the executive branch. And that's where the President has the pressures to ensure that all these men and women are organized and they know exactly what their tasks are at hand. As you can see, there's a picture of the Cabinet of 2009. The Cabinet is another word for a group of people that are assistants and secretaries. Well, actually, this Cabinet, this would all be the secretaries of what we'll discuss more later of all the departments. There's also something called a cabinet, which is not officially secretaries of any cabinet that the President works with in order to get more insight and advice. These people, the term kitchen cabinet came from Andrew Jackson. He was president, let's see, from in the 1800s, I know that, 1829 to 1837, so it was a while ago. And the term derived kitchen because that's where he would have his meetings, is this tiny kitchen, and with these unofficial people that knew things that could advise him in a way that others couldn't. And it was kind of a clandestine meeting, meaning secretive. Can you be president? Well, there's some very basic criteria to check to see if you could be president or eventually could be president. The following are the qualifications for being a candidate for president of the United States. You must be a natural-born American citizen. Now, if you recall, to be a representative or a senator, you don't have to be a natural-born American citizen. You have to live at least 9 years to be a senator and 7 years to be a representative within the United States. And you have to be living as a resident in that state or in the area in which you oversee as a representative, which we call the district. So you need to be a resident of the district. Their main offices, though, you'll find their addresses are listed in Washington, D.C. That's where they carry out their duties during sessions, which is, a session is when they are busy and fully committed to making laws. So the U.S. president also needs to at least be 35 years old. I believe John F. Kennedy was our youngest president. A resident of the United States for at least 14 years. So you may be confused. You need to be a natural-born American citizen. You could move away and live in France or some other country. If you move back, you need to have been living in the United States for at least 14 years. I wonder, if I were teaching you right now, I'd be asking you, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's a requirement to live in the U.S. for at least 14 years? And there is a reason for that. So understanding the process of voting is critical for many people because citizens have been violated in terms of their rights to vote. And so it's important to really understand your right to vote in a private place without anyone pestering you or telling you who to vote for. And you have the right to vote secret ballot, meaning no one can see what you're doing. So every 4 years, on the first Tuesday of November, the people vote for the President of the United States and the Vice President. Oftentimes, though, if you notice, we vote for representatives every 2 years. So oftentimes we'll be at the polls more often, but for President, it's once every 4 years. On Election Day, voters go to a polling place where American citizens are guaranteed the right to vote in a secret ballot, like I said before. That is your right. The secret ballot is a private space where no one can see your choices. The voters know the day of voting who won. However, the Electoral College meets in December to make the election official. So a month later is when it's actually official. So we'll get more into the Electoral College because it's a surprise to many people learning about the U.S. government that we do not have a direct democracy. We have a representative democracy, which means we actually vote for people to represent our opinions and those things that are of our greater interest. So that's something to keep in mind, and we'll go over that soon. One thing about the polling place that I want to mention that's really important to understand is there have been tactics that politicians have used to keep certain groups from voting. We saw this in the 2000 election between Bush and Gore. I'm sorry, I left out Gore. Bush and Gore. So, and we'll also get into that later. I'm going to give you an example of how this was used in earlier times. The 24th Amendment was created to prohibit Congress and the states from conditioning the right to vote in federal elections on payment of a poll tax or other types of tax. What I mean by conditioning the right to vote is they created a way to keep certain groups from being able to vote. This appeared in the southern states, so they taxed people knowing that a certain group would not have the money to be able to pay the tax, and therefore their voice could not be represented in the election. When it was done in the southern states, it was after the Reconstruction, so it was after the Civil War, and it was as a measure to prevent African Americans from voting, and had been held to be constitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1937. It was a decision by the Supreme Court called Breedlove versus Settles. Now, at the time this amendment's passage, 5 states still retained a poll tax. It was Virginia, Alabama, Texas, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Finally, it was made unconstitutional because it's absolutely wrong and in fact violates our Constitution. So here you can see where the Supreme Court had failed. They upheld a consensus opinion of the majority where the African Americans were a minority. So this is where you really need to understand that sometimes the majority does rule and it violates the rights of the minority. So thank goodness for the 24th Amendment to rid us of the poll tax. I'm sure many of us would have been affected by the poll tax. So what is this electoral college that I had been talking about? Some of you might be familiar with it. It is a group of electors who vote for the president and vice president. The number of votes the citizens cast in a presidential election is called the popular vote. So the popular vote is the vote of the people. Now, who are these electors? Well, they are, if you notice in California, in this image of the United States, there are 55 electors in California. Where do these numbers come from? Well, as you recall, there's districts. There's 53 districts in California. 53 districts means 53 representatives. Those representatives make up part of the Electoral College. So for districts, there's about 707,000 people per district or so. What that means is those people are telling the representative of that district to vote for a certain person. So it's like mini elections going on where people are voting, and then that representative looks at the numbers and casts a vote based on who wins within that district. For instance, with Gore and Bush, if most of the people voted for Gore, then the representative would cast an electoral vote for Gore. So basically, we are not a direct democracy. We are an indirect democracy. And that's typical in many countries. So although citizens vote for the president and vice president by name, they are actually voting for an elector. Also, within the 53 in California, the two additional are the senators. So every state has 2 senators that also make up the Electoral College. And the elector who wins the most popular votes, like I was saying, will vote for the president and vice president when the Electoral College meets 1 month later. So they're basically confirming what the people had voted for. Now, does the popular vote, meaning the number of votes the people put in, do they always have their voice represented? Well, typically, yes. However, there have been such cases where a president has been elected that had less of the popular vote and more of the electoral vote. Each state has electors that include senators and representatives, so remember that. And each state has 2 senators, and the number of representatives depends on a state's population. So California has big power when it comes to voting. We're going to go more into detail with how this occurrence of popular vote versus electoral college can make a difference in a president's in the race for outcome. So this is a very interesting topic to discuss: popular vote versus electoral vote. If you notice on the right here, there's Florida, and you can see the Republicans are in red, so those are the districts that voted Republican, and that would have been George Bush in the 2000 presidential election. Al Gore makes up the blue, the Democratic Party, and those are the blue districts. So remember, as you look at those little districts, those are around representing 707,000 people each. There are a total of 538 electoral votes throughout the country. A candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win the election. So sometimes we know the outcome before we've even counted all votes, if they hit 270. So all the votes for a state are given to the candidate who wins the state's popular vote. Okay, so the popular vote, again, it's the people's vote. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution set up the Electoral College. So after the Bill of Rights was made, the 12th Amendment was created. So the Electoral College, they decided that there should be representatives to determine what the popular vote is, and so there was just one more step in casting a vote for a president. Today, many people think the Electoral College is confusing, and it's kind of outdated and shouldn't be around anymore. They think the president, vice president should be elected by popular vote without the electors, like it should just be a direct democracy. In several elections, a candidate really has won the popular vote and lost the Electoral College, as we'll discuss with George Bush versus Al Gore. So please answer this question, and there's no right or wrong. I'm just wondering, why do you think they even created the Electoral College in the first place? Why do you think it existed? Come up with anything. It's just, I want you to really examine why would it be beneficial to even have had an Electoral College in the first place? Some people, I'm going to give you one example and you might want to expand on it. Some people think that the Electoral College protected the nation from those who voted who didn't really understand who or what they were voting for. So it protected the nation from those who were perhaps a little less educated and informed. So that's one example. But maybe you could think of something entirely different. And do you think that we should still have the Electoral College, or should we just vote directly for our president? Take time in answering that question. Alright, so here's the scoop on the popular vote versus Electoral College. We're going to give you a real-life example of what happened in the presidential race of 2011. It all came down to Florida. So all the states had cast their votes, and Al Gore won the popular vote, meaning the votes of the people. But George W. Bush won the electoral vote. How did this happen? Well, let's give you the scoop. All states but Florida were decided. And Florida has 25 electoral votes, and they would decide the election. So both candidates were just nervous, waiting for Florida's results to come in. Bush was only a few hundred popular votes ahead in Florida specifically. By Florida state law, if an election is that close, the votes must be recounted. So they went ahead and they recounted, and it turned out that Bush had fewer votes, which is odd, kind of, you know. Gore asked again for another recount because things seemed fishy in 4 of the counties. So Bush, of course, did not want the recount. And so Gore went ahead and went to the Florida State Supreme Court. So that's the highest court in the state. And the Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to do another recount. Well, Bush was unhappy with this. So he took the case to the United States Supreme Court, which is the greatest of all courts. And the case was called Bush versus Gore. The Supreme Court declared that the recount was unconstitutional because it was not carried out statewide, meaning Gore only had 4 of the districts rechecked, 4 of the counties, only 4 counties rechecked. And the Supreme Court claimed that they needed to do the entire state again. So Bush received Florida's 25, all of Florida's electoral votes. He ended up with a total nationally of 271 electoral votes, 1 more than the required 270. And so Al Gore, although he received 500,000 more popular votes, votes of the people, Bush became president. So can you see where perhaps there's some issues here, and this electoral college system might not be working anymore? But it's up to you. What do you think? So we're on to the presidential term limit. So the president has 2 terms, and that wasn't always the case. That limit was created under the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution in 1951. And I think it was in response to Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was a Democrat during the Depression. And the Great Depression was devastating. And they really needed a good, strong leader to pull the United States out of this depression. I mean, it was so bad that there was a 25% unemployment rate. 25%. That is extremely high. There was poverty everywhere. People were going hungry. We didn't have the safety nets like Social Security, unemployment. So Franklin D. Roosevelt created a lot of social programs to help people. It was called the New Deal. The New Deal was so effective that people kept voting for him. And so he ended up serving 4 terms. That's almost the limits of 2 presidents if they were reelected. So he was a popular president. In fact, the reason why you're in the California Conservation Corps is because of him. He was the originator of something called the California Civilian Corps, which is the evolution. It evolved into the California Conservation Corps. And these corps are throughout the nation. Our particular one, of course, is called the California one. So, due to his effectiveness, he kept being voted in, and yet there was concern. Should we have this be set as a limit? And so my question to you is, once they made that limit in the 22nd Amendment, why do you think there should be a limit? Or do you think there should be a limit? Please explain. This is a question that you need to answer, so pull out a piece of paper and really think about, why would they have a term limit for the president? And do you think it's necessary? Do you think we should have a term limit? So the duties of the president are many. There are many roles the president has. So I don't know if you've done job hunting and notice that there's something called a job description. Well, for the president, their job description would look a little bit something like this. Must perform the following duties. These are the 5 major roles the president plays. The president is a diplomat, meaning someone who's tactful at working with people, skillful with working with people internationally, someone who can maintain healthy relationships. Although we have seen that can fail. They can be terrible in that area. The president must also be a good legislator. Now, he's the head of the executive branch and carries out congressional laws and things like that, but also the president can suggest laws. So you have to be good at that. A political party leader, meaning carrying out the values of your particular party. So if you're a Democrat, you're going to have more liberal values that you maintain as a president, because you're representing why you were voted in. Probably was because the people wanted someone who had those values that you carry in your party. As a world leader, not only are you meeting with other leaders, you also care about maintaining good international relations and supporting those that you have made certain contracts with. Commander-in-chief is the last one. And what does that mean? You're a military leader. So if you're president, you're also in charge of the military. These are a lot of very important roles. We're going to go into more detail on the next slide. Now we're going to go into more detail of the duties of the president. If you could please draw 5 circles and write in each of the duties that the president has. Entitle it Duties of the President. So as I'm talking, you'll have circles with each one titled as a duty that the president has. You'll need this for your notes later when you take the midterm. So as a diplomat, it means he deals with people skillfully and tactfully. The president makes decisions about relations with other nations. So hopefully the president makes wise decisions in dealing with other people and understands how to interact with even the most difficult people, including, for instance, the leader of North Korea, and understands why a leader might choose to behave in a way that they do. And also, hopefully, the president also understands that his or her choices impact other nations. On the next one, legislative duties. Again, this is the role of creating law or signing or vetoing bills, which the president often does, being that thousands of bills cross the president's desk. The president gives something called the State of the Union Address, and I'm sure you've heard bits and pieces of the State of the Union Address. And in that address, the president discusses key points of major impact that the nation is needing to have influence on. For instance, there has been a great recession, so the president might discuss more jobs being created or allocating funds to those in need. So a lot of the content of the State of the Union Address discusses changes that are going to be happening in the future that address some of the issues that are coming up in the nation and the things that could use great improving. So he discusses the condition of our country and what is to be planned for the coming year, and also the budget for the year. So how is money going to be spent? Where are cuts going to be made? Okay, the next one is political party leader, which is, you know, the parties in place. We tend to be a two-party system, though there are many parties. There's the Green Party. There's so many parties that it's kind of strange that we only vote in typically Democrats and Republicans. So those values are in place. So liberals tend to be more Democratic. Conservatives tend to be more Republican. So those values should be carried out by the president and follows those party plans and appoints people to jobs who also carries out those values. So some presidents are bipartisan, meaning they'll appoint someone who has perhaps a different set of values, but can follow and challenge the president to think more critically about how the party is executing their own goals. So it's always good when the president appoints people to jobs to not just be so party dependent, But that is a major role under political party leader. Who are you appointing to these jobs? Are they going to help carry the values of our party? The world leader role, supposedly, these are all ideals, and we don't always see them in action. In fact, sometimes to our terror, we see our president making horrendous decisions that devastate small nations. In fact, we've done that too much. But the ideal is that we help smaller nations because other leaders are actually studying and following what the president chooses and does. And ideally, the president promotes peace, which can happen. I'm sure of it. And we have done this. When there have been reports of genocide, we do defend. For instance, in World War II, Germany was killing Jews, so we have done some good. The commander-in-chief role is a role that primarily means the president oversees the armed forces. Now, the president does not have the right to declare war. That is a duty of Congress. However, the president can send troops when there is danger. So, yeah, the president can't declare war. In fact, Congress has only declared war 5 times. Okay, so, but the president has used military force in other nations more than 200 times. Bill Clinton sent soldiers to Haiti to bring back democracy there. President Harry Truman sent U.S. troops during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. President John Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon sent troops to the Vietnam War from 62 to 73. Those wars were fought even though Congress did not declare war. So, you see how things can get a little blurry. However, these are the duties of the president, and we see where there is a fine line and those duties do become blurred. Okay, let's do a quick review. 4 questions is all. So the first one is, the president is blank of the armed forces. Number 2, as chief diplomat of the United States, the president appoints blank to foreign countries. Number 3, blank has power to declare war. And the last one is an opinion one. What actions of the president can change the president's popularity with citizens? So we're going to close out this pretty lengthy chapter on who advises the president. And let's start with a brief overview of the cabinet. We'll go into more detail later in chapters 6 and 7 on the cabinet. But the president, as political party leader, appoints the cabinet members. So if he's a political party leader, it means he's following the values of the party when he appoints the cabinet. There are 15 executive departments. And once the president appoints these cabinet members, the Senate has to approve. It's a form of checks and balances. The leaders in each department are called secretaries. For instance, you've heard the term Secretary of Defense. That is one of the president's cabinet and one of the executive department leaders. Okay, so this is our final page of this chapter, and then the last thing you will do is you're going to list the agencies under the executive office. So you're going to want to listen carefully for this page, because the next page you will be asked to fill in your own bubbles and describe one task each agency performs. Okay, so the people who advise the president, well, there's something called the executive office, and under the executive office there are agencies. So you see the 5 octagons. Are those octagons? hexagons in front of you, and the White House office is one of them, the National Security Council another, and then we'll go on to the Office of Budget and Management, the Council of Economic Affairs, and finally the Council on Environmental Quality. So I'm going to briefly tell you what each one does and who's in it, and you're going to be asked in the next slide to write at least one task each of these does. So you might want to take note. So the executive office is made up of advisors and aides, and they help out the president. And they manage the day-to-day work. When we say there's an agency, agent, the root term means to do, to act. So this again is a very functional department. It has to do with fulfilling certain duties and getting things done. So under the White House office, what do they get done? Well, they work closest with the president. So they are the most intimate. If we were to draw concentric circles around the president as the center, the closest concentric circle would be the White House office. So these people are longtime supporters of the president. They have worked for a long time, probably prior to even when the president was elected. The press secretary is one of the main ones who works directly with the president under the White House office. They supply White House news to the press, so they are kind of the liaison from connecting what the White House office is doing and informing the press what's happening. Other assistants help write the president's speeches, so you have your speech writers. You also have the personal doctors, so these are very intimate professional relationships under the White House office. There are people who counsel the president on legal advice and policy decisions. The president's chief of staff, the chief of staff leads the White House office. So under the president, there is someone who oversees the White House office. They are called the chief of staff. So that's the White House office. The National Security Council advises the president about security, safety, or safety of the country. So this is a big role when it comes to military and foreign policy. The CIA works under this council. The CIA gathers information about the other country's security. For instance, right now, the CIA is most likely heavily involved with North Korea. The fact that North Korea is threatening the U.S. triggers CIA action. So these agents are probably working in North Korea right now and reporting their findings to the National Security Council. So this is a major role in ensuring the safety of the U.S. citizens. The President, Vice President, and Secretaries of State and Defense head the CIA. So there's a lot of people dealing with the CIA. These people are on the National Security Council also. I must say, the council is a group of people who meet up and discuss current issues. Next, the Office of Budget and Management. Okay, this is more dealing with the federal budget. The budget is prepared yearly and lists all the money, the income that is expected, and how will we spend that money. And so the budget is ready. The president presents it to Congress, and the Office of Budget Management is also called the OMB. That's the acronym. And they study how the executive branch is run and make suggestions for the president and how to improve and change things. Once a year, Congress approves a federal budget, and it's set as an appropriations bill. Appropriations means how money will be channeled into what areas. Are we going to focus on education? Are we going to have it spent on the military, public policy, whatever that may be? The appropriations bill is either passed or failed by October 1st to September 30th of the next year. Let's see. Let's move on to the Council of Economic Advisors. They give the president information about the nation's economy. So this is sort of similar to the budget, but this is more broad. They report money matters and suggest programs that are in dire need. The president uses this information to report to Congress and to the American people about the nation's economy. So why is this important? The Council of Economic Affairs played a huge role during Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency because we were in a depression. So they were highly involved in creating the New Deal, which brought about all kinds of work programs. Again, FDR was voted into office 4 times, the only president to have done that. He relied on the Council of Economic Affairs to provide input on what kind of programs need to be put in place to improve the economy. And the Civilian Corps, which is the original California Conservation Corps, that was produced because the Council of Economic Affairs reported what was needed to improve our economy. And last but not least, the Council on Environmental Quality. So you might guess, yes, they report on the conditions of the environment, and it's definitely a president's responsibility to govern the control of clean water, clean air, careful use of natural resources, and this is done in part because of the Council on Environmental Quality. There's other tiny councils. I'll just give you a few examples, though you won't be required to report on these in the next slide. There's one about foreign trade and labor matters, and there are other councils that keep the president informed about the latest research in science. So these are smaller councils, and maybe one day they'll be a bigger part. So this closes out Chapter 5. Please continue on to the last slide to finish it up. Thank you.